On the first night, I noticed the spirits haunting my new home. Naturally, it was too late by then. I had already signed the lease after a grueling search for a property, and this was the ideal location, near the hospital where I worked, affordable yet lovely, and recently remodeled. In any case, I quickly realized that the ghosts wouldn't hurt me, and that neither they nor I seemed to care about each other. I put in long, hard hours at work, and by the time I got home, I was generally exhausted. I hardly stayed up long enough to push some food down my mouth before dozing off on the couch and dragging myself bleary-eyed to bed a few hours later. I seen far worse at work, so a few whispers and groans, along with a few shadows darting here and there, were barely enough to disturb me. The fact that they all had broken necks must have been strange, each and every one of them. The young lad who was no older than 14, the girl who was pregnant, the tall, attractive man who resembled a young Paul Newman. Despite having a fractured neck and his head resting sideways on his shoulders, his charming smile and vivid blue eyes were still visible. There were many more, and I pondered how many women had fell at his feet when he smiled at them while he was still living. I saw them hovering around the stairwells and elevators, grumbling and groaning as they darted around the corners of my flat. As soon as I stepped into the bathroom, they went behind the shower curtain, and when I got into bed, they disappeared into the closet. It was a gorgeous sunny day on my first day off since I moved there, one of those ideal early October days that are far more lovely than anything spring or summer could possibly provide. As I sat in the kitchen cradling my coffee, I could feel the week's weariness leaking out of my bones. My spirits were unaffected even by the boy scrambling out of the window with his head resting uncomfortably on his shoulder. I was intrigued by it though. What was up with the shattered necks, really? I walked over to the window and gazed at the sun in the morning. I could make out a group of them on the fire escape landing in the sunlight. The building's back was lined with thin, black metal fire escape stairs, each story having a short landing. On the landing beneath mine, there must have been 4 of them huddled together. Then I realized they weren't by themselves. They were sitting with my neighbor, a young woman with gleaming brown-yellow hair who lived in the apartment below mine. Wearing brand-new contemporary clothing, the lone survivor of the group had a straight, undamaged neck. With the exception of Paul Newman, who was obviously dressed sharply in black, I had already realized that the ghosts were all mostly clad in dirty tatters. I had already seen her a few times, enough to say hello and give her that hesitant nod and grin. She appeared to be a well-educated, polished young lady with a pleasant, lengthy career ahead of her. However, I suppose she had no excuse not to notice the ghosts just as I did. And more, she had already established a rapport with them, as evidenced by the easygoing manner in which she sat on the landing with her legs hanging out the edge. In a way that simply seeing the spirits and hearing their sighs and murmurs throughout the building never did, watching her converse with them made me nervous. What in the world were they discussing with such vigor? I opened the door to my own kitchen and stepped out onto my landing without incident. Even amid the cries of the kids playing on the grass outside, I could definitely hear their voices, however low. Charlie's case was won, my living neighbor told me. To be honest, I consider it a personal triumph. I hope you recognize that. His family will now live comfortably. The pregnant girl remarked, "That's nice, Katie. Well done. I missed seeing him all damaged and sullen on the grounds, wearing his bloodied yellow vest, and I was wondering where he had gone. Then he was at peace. Well done, Katie." I noticed Katie grinning. Yes, it was difficult, and the business fought fiercely. However, I succeeded. "Well done, hey, as well as you." However, what does that gain us? As always, we had just left here, aren't we? Exclaimed the tiny child, gazing up at Katie. Through the metal fences, I saw Katie's sincere young face, filled with sympathy and sorrow for these miserable spirits, and I knew she wanted to assist them in finding peace as well. I continued to study and listen. The stairs was located precisely where the city gallows had been, and the structure was on the site of the former courtroom. Mary answered. It was Judge Wilson. The girl who was pregnant was her. For killing her master, who had slept with her, Mary was hanged. Despite having a fractured neck, her young beauty was evident. Despite the fact that she was already pregnant when she was imprisoned, they said she had deceived the jail guard into getting her pregnant in order to avoid being hanged. They suggested she should die with her bastard. Because they didn't want any competitors for their own children, her lord and his wife had made sure of it. She narrated the narrative as she must have done countless times before, the anguish, rage, and confusion in her voice unadulterated by the years. Through the murmuring ghost voices, Katie's voice could be heard clearly as she added, I know the Wilson family. They are the owners of the development firm that constructed this location, the firm that we sued on Charlie's behalf. Still powerful city officials. He was a nasty, evil man. Because of his wickedness, we are all locked here and cannot move on. Thus, it is wrong that his family prancing about town. The day after he was hanged for belonging to a notorious criminal gang, Johnny would have turned 14. Johnny had been sacrificed as part of a deal the gang leader had made with the court. Today, the Wilson Development Company included the gang leader's descendants as partners. Katie let out a sigh. It was all corrupt, not just Judge Wilson. Their desperate, sideways faces gathered around her. Please, Katie, free us as well. The crooked smile of Paul Newman flashed. You'll take care of it for me, Katie. My blood froze. Others may pass away. There are kids here. Katie objected. Mary held her stomach. And my kid is still alive? Blood must be present. I was confident that Katie would comply with their request. I don't recall moving or making any noise, but I must have, since all of them, including Katie, suddenly appeared and stared directly at me. I still have dreams about those awful sideways faces and upside-down eyes that stare at me through the bars. He's been listening to us, exclaimed Mary. Perhaps Ez Cafe is with the Wilsons, a spy, Johnny exclaimed. I turned and entered the house without a word. I couldn't remain, though. The apartment's walls were pressing down on me, and the sighs and murmurs that had seemed innocuous before were now piercing my mind. To get my thoughts straight, I put on a jacket and stepped outside. I made my way swiftly over the green children's ball field to a remote wooded location farther away. As I walked among the woods and took deep breaths, I felt better, and my heart rate decreased. Then I heard a twig break and a footstep. It was already too late when I turned around. Katie was slamming a bat down on me when I last saw her. In my mind, a flash went off and I fell into the blackness. I regained consciousness via swimming. White lights were piercing me, and my head was pounding. There he is, a voice said. You were fortunate, even though you might not realize it now. You were saved by being in the hospital. I focused. My coworker was speaking while politely glancing down at me. What took place? I croaked. I got some water from her. They discovered you with head damage, unconscious, in the woods. The police were over here, and they picked up the individual who will be charged with lighting the fire, since they believe it was the same person who attacked you. I blinked. What's the fire? You wouldn't know, of course, honey. I apologize. I've been hurried away. Victims of burns in the hallways. I must run. However, your building, yes, it is no longer there. Last night, one of your neighbors went crazy and set it on fire. She went out. I was present at Katie's trial. Calmly, she explained how simple it had been to burn the place down. The entire building was on fire in 15 minutes because the Wilson contractors had cheated on the insulating materials. She had no regrets. 25 people lost their lives, including those who threw themselves and their kids out of the upper story's windows, enough to release their ghosts, but not as many as had been mistakenly hung. I strolled around the building's charred remains whenever I could. There were no traces of the spirits, and it was quiet. After that, I believe my thoughts went blank. I don't recall bidding my brother and his spouse farewell. I can't recall the automobile driving away. I only recall pondering whether or not to enter my house when I was standing in the driveway, facing it. The gashes in my leg were now starting to hurt. Until the bleeding stopped, I had only dabbed at it with tissues. They had a ragged look and were deeper than I initially believed. In the end, I made the decision to locate a clinic that was open on Saturdays and have it appropriately wrapped while I thought about my options. To get ready, I walked past the basement entrance. The door had lost its air of hatred in the morning light. That was a relief, I suppose. The doctor asked me if I had been attacked when I saw her. "It was furniture corners," I answered with a bashful laugh. She gave me a curious eyebrow lift. Then, without saying a word, she lifted a hand, formed it like a claw, and carefully pulled it over the bandage across the wounds. Furniture corners most definitely did not make those cuts. As the thumb's line attested, not even by an animal claw. A hand had created them. "Are you certain that you are safe?" The doctor asked me politely. "Do you need any help?" I was certain that I was in danger. And I was certain that I needed assistance. I only shook my head, though. How could I respond? Had some demonic force mistreated me in my basement? She resigned to list accident as the source of injuries, since she was unable to get anything else out of me. I left the clinic well after lunch because I had been waiting a long time for the doctor. Still not sure what to do, I sat down at a fast food restaurant nearby when my brother called. He informed me that they had moved to a hotel in the city and invited me to have supper with them. "Yes," I replied. I said my shout for the bad night. With a quiet laugh, he explained that coping with night terrors was a normal part of being a parent. He added that they discovered they were missing a bottle of milk. Since Ava frequently fell asleep with a milk bottle in her hand, they believe she was carrying one when she descended to the basement. I wouldn't have gone into the basement for $1 million, but I told my brother I'd look. I find it difficult to say no. I hung up the phone and pictured the milk bottle in the basement, gathering dust in that strange, foreboding area. Then it dawned on me. Milk. The liquid cups that were consumed by morning. The bread's bits were left out. What if Knox wasn't responsible for that? What if the creature in the basement went out at night and consumed objects? The idea made me wriggle, but I recalled going on tour in the UK and seeing several old cottages. The guide had shown us a metal saucer near the cottage entrance that was artistically positioned on a large flat rock and contained milk and some biscuits. In the witching hour, the homeowners apparently had a centuries-old custom of leaving milk and biscuits out for the fae that walked in and around the house. He also indicated a corner of the building where the angle had been beveled away, explaining that they had done so to allow the fair folk to pass unhindered, since they thought the stone obstructed a fae path. The cottage was also said to be haunted, although the residents were much more terrified of upsetting the fairies than they were of the resident ghost. Had I just found myself in a similar predicament? I packed a bag and went home. After the visitors had left and the basement door was unlocked during the day, I would have cleaned my house. However, I couldn't stop imagining that I would open a door or turn a corner and see a frightening little girl staring up at me. Absolutely not. Before making any more decisions, I had made the decision to test this fae theory of mine. I poured a glass of milk and placed it with a piece of bread by the downstairs entrance before I went. Then I ran out my front door and unlocked the basement, making sure that was the last thing I had to do. My brother and family joined me for dinner. Ava appeared to be largely over the shock of the night before. I was not questioned about the missing bottle. They might have forgotten. Or perhaps they were aware that something was strange in the basement. That night, I didn't notify anyone that I wasn't coming home. Rather, I read up on folklore while spending a sleepless night at a budget hotel. In order to placate odd nocturnal humanoid creatures, it turns out that people in many civilizations place food, milk, and even animal blood outside their homes. A few of those animals pulled practical jokes. Others took infants from cribs and sucked blood from your toes. I returned to my home in the morning. I started by making my way gingerly to the kitchen. The milk level was indeed lower than when I had left it. Additionally, there were bread nibbles. Deeper in the house, there was a crisp rap. Yes, with a single knock. I waited in the kitchen until nightfall on that first day. Just in case I had to run, I had a suitcase packed in the car. Even though I was perspiring profusely, I remained firm. The door was never the source of the menace. I cautiously made my way to my room at around 1 a.m. and locked the door. Thanks to my research, I put a line of iron filings over my room's threshold as an added precaution. I take it that Fae dislike cold iron? According to the stories. It was a long time before the basement door felt fearful again. I made a ceasefire with the creature in the basement in this way. I used to leave a slice of bread and milk on the kitchen floor near the cellar entrance every night. It doesn't consume it every time. I'm still not sure if what I saw was real or simply in my head, so I'm adding this as a last comment. I arrived home late one evening for an unknown cause. I threw out my peace gift on the kitchen floor, locked the doors, and quickly cleaned the dishes. By that time, the windows had black panes and it was gloomy. After turning out each light individually, I retreated toward the stairs and gave the night things control of the basement. I went upstairs and at last switched off the stair light. The only other time I broke the rules was when I ran away with Ava through the basement the other night, for which I was rewarded with scratches on my calf. Perhaps I caught a glimpse of something or heard something. Somehow, I spun around and peered back down into the shadows. A pale little hand was outstretched and reaching out to me on the 3rd or 4th step of the steps. It lost itself around the corner and attached itself to an incredibly long arm that slithered towards the kitchen. Suddenly, it darted back into the darkness, disappearing from view. The whole thing happened so quickly that it might have been a visual illusion. In any case, I ran to my room and have never looked back into my house's darkness at night. When things first started, Knox would just knock. I began to notice that Knox really enjoyed voicing its opinions, after I completely accepted that it was more than just the house settling. I now exclusively use headphones instead of speakers to listen to the radio, podcasts, or videos because of this. I have a suspicion that people more bolder than myself would be enticed to get to know Knox. That strikes me as a really rash idea. I have no idea what Knox is or what it is capable of. What if it turned out to be some strange eldritch creature that lives behind the walls and would drive someone crazy? I will only go so far as to be friendly with it. In that sense, Knox has another small rule. It will rap sharply twice if it doesn't want you somewhere. The most straightforward communication we have developed between us is 1 for yes, 2 for no. I simply leave a room silently and return later if I hear 2 knocks. I haven't questioned Knox about this before, and I won't find out what would happen if I did. However, I soon discovered that Knox will also move objects, primarily plates and cups. Occasionally in the morning, a cup of water and a cup of milk that I had left unfinished would be empty. Even worse, I would see tiny but noticeable bits out of food if I left it out, especially bread. The obvious human tooth indentations are not mouse bites. That must have been my incentive to keep the place tidy. And Knox and I have lived our own lives in this manner. The basement comes next. The basement nearly made me decide not to purchase the house. There's a weird, eerie area that protrudes from one of the walls. It is only 4 feet across, a couple of feet deep, and roughly chest height. Additionally, it contains scaffolding that has been painted yellow and crisscrosses at diagonals, making it nearly impossible to keep anything inside. It has a presence about it, although I'm not sure what it was employed for. You simply know that you shouldn't be in it or even close to it. As a result, I haven't kept anything in the basement. The house and water heating systems are located downstairs, along with some lingering items from past occupants, such as antique wooden tables and chairs. Unless it's absolutely necessary, I don't go down there. The few times I've had to go down there, it's only been in the daytime. Even yet, I adhered to a few guidelines that kids naturally understand when navigating unfamiliar, frightening environments. To avoid annoying it or attracting its attention, you avoid making loud or superfluous noises. To avoid giving the impression that you're scared or conscious of it, you don't race or hurry through your tasks. You don't wait and try to test its patience, though. After finishing, you switch off the lights without turning around. Before I tell you the rest of the story, here's what you should know. The dark frightens me. I don't know why, but I've always been since I was a child. Dealing with the dark has been a big adjustment for me since I moved out on my own. Between knocks and my nyctophobia, I had developed the habit of spending the entire night in my room during the first few months of being here. While there was still light, I would finish all the dishes, prepare everything for the following day, and turn off all the lights downstairs. After that, I would carry my overnight supplies, snacks, beverages, instant noodles, etc., up to my room. There is no need to leave my bedroom during the night because it has an attached bathroom. I even have a kettle and a little refrigerator in my room. I was in my small haven of jammies, computer games, chill hot music, and my Kindle reader as soon as the bedroom door was closed. Even knocks seemed to have the manners to avoid bothering me there too much. The house would gradually become dark below, and it would stay that way until morning. The elements of the house were in contractual harmony in the evening, save for the very infrequent necessity for me to sneak down and quickly grab something. It abandoned me, and I abandoned it. Until my brother and family made the decision to come visit. My brother and I are not close. I think we both do our best to connect, but we're simply extremely different individuals. Nevertheless, I was pleased to have him, his wife, and their daughter in my new home. Over the weekend, they intended to spend a few nights there. Just down the landing is my bedroom and the only other one. They were not large, but they got by. I had a mattress for their 5-year-old daughter, Ava, and my brother and his wife would sleep in the bed. Ava was a calm child who was respectful, obedient, and bashful. She read her books, drew in her art pad, and watched videos on her tablet during the most of her time at home. Ava came up to me at around 7:30 right after a delivery meal. Her simple words were, "Uncle, who's the little girl living here?" I get spooked easily in case you haven't guessed that. And this was classic creepy. Initially, I wondered if Knox had shown itself to her. Knox has previously played pranks on house visitors. "Which little girl?" I asked, smiling reassuringly so as not to startle Ava. Her gaze turned back to the kitchen mentioned earlier. "The one standing by the door in the kitchen," she said. "The way she looks at me bothers me." "She's frightening," Ava whispered. It became lodged in my throat when I swallowed. "Is she still there?" I inquired. Ava gave a headshake. I strolled as casually as I could to the kitchen and looked at the door. As usual, it was closed and led to the basement. Instead of opening it, I moved to a small key rack I had hanging beside the rear sliding door. An old-fashioned, slightly rusty key was on the rack. This was the key to the basement door. I grabbed it, turned astutely, and clanged the door shut. When I firmly tried the handle, the door remained in place. "It's locked now," I murmured, turning back to Ava. "There's nothing leaving that door." She left to look for her mother after feeling satisfied by that. For whatever reason, I never mentioned it to my brother and his wife, even though I felt I should have. That night, they all went to bed early, and I withdrew into my room. Even though there was no wind, I could hear the house creaking a little before I went to sleep. In retrospect, I believe Knox was attempting to convey a message to me. A harsh knock on my door awakened me up. When I emerged, my brother appeared agitated. There was no sign of Ava. She was gone from the mattress when my brother woke up. He assumed she had gone to the restroom because the door to the guest bedroom was open. However, he went to check when she didn't return after a few minutes. She wasn't using the restroom. He had awakened his wife at that point. Before he chose to wake me up as well, they had been looking for a long time. I instantly joined them in their search, and together we turned on all the lights in every room. While yelling for Ava, we checked under every piece of furniture she could have fit under, behind every curtain and behind every cupboard. At last, my brother went to check on his daughter in the backyard. It was the only door Ava could have unlocked to the outside world. His wife was rummaging through every room. One more. A feeling of chilly dread was added to the anxious feeling in my stomach. I knew Ava's whereabouts. I looked at the rack of keys. I was positive I had put the basement key back, but it was gone. The door was unlocked when I tested the handle. The darkness seemed to pour out of the door as I swung it open, chilling me to the core. There were 2 piercing raps overhead. No 2. I was a little taken aback that Knox would be concerned about my welfare, or did it fear the basement as well? Despite my fear, I had to descend because my 5-year-old niece was down there. For a brief minute, I thought of calling my brother or sister-in-law to come along. However, that didn't feel correct. I simply knew that I had to abide by that guideline. Don't display your fear. Don't admit that you are aware of its existence. Perhaps that's why in horror films they usually split apart. We all know the rules, but we never share them. I turned the basement's switch on. There was no light. The light bulb must have died. Fish sticks. Ava, I yelled. From below, I heard the smallest sound of movement. I switched on the flashlight on my phone and cautiously made my way down the steps. My falling and breaking my leg was the last thing we needed at this moment. As I used the light to examine the basement, the legs of antique furniture glinted back at me, creating shadows that spelled obscenities on the walls. Down there, the cold was intense. The exposed flesh of my arms pricked, and my breath was hazy. I wasted little time in searching behind the chairs and tables. I headed directly for the unfamiliar area. Indeed, there was a bundle of pajamas and dark hair behind the strange diagonal scaffolding. I knew the area was 2 feet deep, but she appeared to be much deeper. Ava, I muttered. She sniffed and turned to face me, her eyes big and marred by tears. Ava, come out. It's all right, I'm present. Unmoving, she shook her head at me. I inhaled deeply before reaching between the scaffolding. I managed to get Ava under her arms and gently pull her to me, even though I had to squirm between the bars. She buried her head in my shoulder, grasped at my shirt, and started sobbing loudly. The chill abruptly gave way to an oppressive heat. The abrupt drop in temperature made me ill. I made my way to the stairs, still only using the light from my phone as a guide. Was it gloomier? I thought I was less visible than previously. Even though the pile of inverted furniture was only a few feet long, it felt like a hallway that went on forever. As though to ward off the darkness, I squatted with the phone in my hand. Shadows flew in all directions as my phone's flare did a little crazy dance. I didn't focus too much on the dark shapes, though. I didn't want to see a young girl's silhouette. Rather, my entire energy was directed into shoving past the stack of furniture, staggering up the stairs, and bursting into my kitchen's orange light. Still clutching Ava, I fell to my knees, gasping for air like I had just finished a marathon. My sister-in-law hurried over as soon as she saw us, gasping. She was shedding tears of relief. At that moment, my brother also entered from the backyard. I grabbed something from Ava's tiny fist as I handed her over to her parents, the key to the basement door. According to my sister-in-law, "Why did you go down there, baby?" Ava merely cried, unable to respond. I was about to scream myself, but I didn't blame her. My brother said, "You're bleeding," and I heard it. He gestured toward my leg. A bright red stain was gradually spreading across my left trouser leg when I looked down. After carefully pulling it back and removing it from my skin, I could see multiple lengthy scratches on the back of my leg, as if someone had attempted to seize my heel. I said, I must have scraped something down there. The wounds were really starting to sting now that I knew about them and the adrenaline was fading. In case of tetanus or whatever, my brother mentioned getting the scratches examined. Then, leaving me alone with the gaping black of the basement door, he and his wife returned to their chamber, focusing on the distraught Ava. I sensed the threat emanating from the shadows. I carefully closed the door, being careful not to move it too quickly, as if it were an alligator's gaping maw. I could feel the hatred beating on it from the opposite side, even with it closed. After inserting the key into the keyhole and locking it, I let myself breathe again. From above came 2 piercing raps. "Yes, Knox, I am aware. It wasn't finished." In the morning, my brother and his family made the decision to leave the residence. They were unable to extract much more from Ava, but they were certain that she did not want to be in my home. I had the same feeling. They prepared to depart by packing up. Ava approached me to say farewell with a hug. She gave me this sly glance as I bent down to her level. The residence was situated in Hamden, Massachusetts, on a roadway known as Rockadundy Road. Rockadundy Road is surrounded by thick New England woodlands, just like the rest of the area. It's a section of unpaved road that leads into Stafford, Connecticut, after passing through some dark woods. This road has a number of houses, one of which was for sale. I got the short end of the stick when the family asked my real estate company to assist in selling it. My initial reaction upon seeing the house was, why would anyone want to live out here in the boonies? As I drove down the unpaved road, I frowned at the dirt that stuck to my automobile. I went to the front door and knocked, wondering where the nearest car wash was. I was greeted inside by a wiry-looking man wearing thick spectacles and a receding scalp. He gave me a tour of the residence. It was constructed in the 19th century, but the interior was exquisite. Clean, shiny walls and lovely hardwood floors. With 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, the house was essentially a deal because the family was asking so little for it. Along with the list of topics I needed to explain to my clients, such as the septic system and the knob and tube electrical wiring, the homeowner offered me a tour of the house. He showed me all the electrical outlets and lighting fixtures, and our shoes clattered on the hardwood floor. For the sake of the narrative, I will refrain from introducing you to any additional home inspection lingo. Before leaving, the homeowner turned to face me and inquired, "Do you believe in ghosts?" I refrained from speaking. In my line of work, such views were not acceptable. He simply shrugged his shoulders and got into his pickup when I gently told him no. He vanished down the road, and I saw his car whip up a whirlwind of dust. I didn't see the homeowner again after that. I looked at my timepiece. I was throwing an open house today, and it was scheduled to begin at noon. I was alone in the middle of nowhere for 2 hours. I went back inside after grabbing my Kindle from the car. I'm the kind of person who reads best in silence. Some people can read in busy cafes, while others can do so while the TV is on. I would read paragraph after paragraph without taking in anything if I didn't have a peaceful place to read. I initially became aware of the total quiet of the environment when I was reading. It seemed as though there was a real lack of sound, not simply ordinary silence. I was used to hearing neighbors walking their dogs and cars outside, but I heard nothing here, not even the natural sounds of birdsong. All I could hear was the gentle pounding of my heart in my chest. It was rather cold in here too, I noted. There must have been some kind of draft in the house because of the large spaces and the absence of furnishings. Despite my teeth chattering, I zipped my coat up to my chin and carried on reading. I got up and proceeded to look for the thermostat when I thought I could take it no more. The thermostat stood close to the basement door when I noticed a startling whooshing sound coming from downstairs. I turned it up to 75. A beat skipped in my chest. It sounded as though the basement faucet was running. When I opened the door, I was met with the eerie darkness of the basement. I climbed down the creaking wooden stairs and struggled for the light switch. The unfinished basement had a spooky appearance. The room's corners were engulfed in darkness due to the single light bulb's subpar illumination. Scratchy white sheets had been used to cover furniture left by the previous family. As I moved closer to the source of the noise, a sink close to the washing machine and dryer, they gazed on like silent ghosts. I rushed over and twisted the valve shut so I wouldn't have to spend too much time down here. I had the strange childhood impression that a monster was waiting for me to turn around at the foot of the stairs as I hurried up them. I forced myself not to look over my shoulder as I closed the door. I took a few long breaths while leaning my back against the cellar door. As I fought off the hold of old childhood phobias, the hairs on my body stood on end. Now I was a grown-up. I could reason. Just as I was beginning to relax, I heard footsteps on the hardwood floor and the front door swing open. Clack, clack, and more. They were moving towards me. I went around the corner to meet him, assuming it was the homeowner. It was still too early for clients. I was shocked to discover that no one was there. However, the door was ajar and a few leaves were currently blowing in from the outside. With timidity, I yelled, "Hello?" After closing the door without a response, I made the decision to take a quick look around the house in case someone had chosen to enter. I nervously peered inside each room. Every one of them was vacant. With my Kindle in hand, I took a seat again and considered the homeowner's question. "Do you think ghosts exist?" replayed in my mind. I trembled. A haunted house is not something I could market. It wouldn't even be acknowledged, much less accepted by my company. It was a surefire way to lose a deal when you told a prospective buyer that the house they were viewing might be haunted. In this economy, I couldn't afford to lose a sale. I would therefore lie, like any salesperson would. The following hour was just as silent as the one before. I began to believe that the sounds of the footfall were just hallucinations. Since I was still recovering from the irrational terror of a monster in the basement, my hearing had simply produced the impression of footfall on its own. My logical thinking informed me that the door had opened on its own. The gushing water was most likely the result of an odd trip between the downstairs faucet and the thermostat, if that made sense. A knock on the door gave me another little scare. Fortunately, a young couple who wanted to purchase the house was present. I ushered them inside and gave them a tour. They intended to raise their unborn child in a peaceful setting, so they were impressed by the house and its location. Everything was okay until the lights began to flicker. With older houses like this one, you sometimes face problems with the wiring, I said to the husband as he turned to me for an explanation. For instance, knob and tube wiring was used in the construction of this one. I'm sure an electrician could be sent in to check it, but the previous families never had any problems with it. My open house essentially went like that. Some strange phenomena would occur, and I would have to immediately refute it. I even persuaded myself at the end that the house was not experiencing any paranormal activity. A faucet would turn on at multiple times while I was in client appointments. The kitchen sink was the one that turned on by itself most of the time, but occasionally it was the basement sink. I informed them that there was a little plumbing issue and that a plumber would be able to resolve it as I went over to turn it off. A few times, the sounds of rustling or footsteps could be heard. I would then reassure my clients that it was just the sound of squirrels scuttling on the roof or the home settling in. It surprised me how well I covered this ghost's songs. I believe I even came up with a couple terms to calm my clients down. I couldn't wait to get home once my session was completely concluded. My bones hurt and I needed a hot shower because of how cold the house was. When I noticed a pair of shoes at the top of the stairs, I packed my things and started to leave. My gaze gradually moved to the top of the stairs where a 5-year-old boy stood on the landing of the second level. The child had a DIY bowl cut and was dressed in faded overalls. Like children who have a secret to share, he gave me a cheeky smirk. I softly shouted out to him, "Hello?" "Little boy, did your parents abandon you?" I kept asking him questions as I carefully made my way up the steps in his direction, but he didn't respond. "What's your name? Where are your parents?" The boy gave me a high-pitched giggle and ran down the hall when I was about halfway up the stairs. Taking it lightly, I followed him. He was standing outside one of the bedrooms when I ascended the last step. He shushed, bringing a finger to his lips, and rushed into the room. I sighed in exasperation and pushed him into the room. He seemed to have disappeared into thin air, even though I had only been a few steps behind him. I looked inside the closet. In an attempt to find a trap door where this child might have been hiding, I even wrapped my hand over the walls. I found something, but I didn't find the little guy. A folded piece of paper had been left out in the corridor. I saw a letter scribbled in a small child's sloppy handwriting on it, and when I took it up and looked it over, "Remain away," I was perplexed and a little uneasy about Sarah. Finding letters and meeting someone in person was a much different matter than just hearing things. In a haste, I left the home and drove out down the dirt road, far from the little kid and Sarah, whoever she was. I tried to forget the day's events by taking a long, hot shower when I arrived home that evening. My retina blazed with the sight of the eerie youngster, and my ears rang with the sound of his laughter. I was scared of seeing the boy in person or worse, so I didn't want to close my eyes for too long. Like a fever, my terror boiled up inside me. I pulled out my laptop and started looking for information about Rockadundy Road. I started reading the reports in an attempt to distinguish fact from fiction after coming across a number of urban legends about that location. As it happens, Rockadundy Road is thought to be a very haunted location. Witnesses have reported seeing nooses dangling from trees and odd lights in the woods. They also claimed being chased off the road by phantom cars. In the nearby lake, a girl drowned. In the light of the full moon, witnesses say they saw this girl sitting on the rocks across the lake. Additionally, there is a cemetery on Rockadundy where a number of people expressed unease. I grew increasingly terrified as I read through the accounts. I found 2 accounts that corroborated my observations. One concerned a little child who was killed by a drunk driver while driving. The second concerned a woman who lived close to the cemetery I described before. There are rumors that late-night drivers will have mechanical issues in front of the cemetery. This woman would emerge from the woods with a hatchet while they were busy attempting to start their automobile.